Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, December 19th. December 19th. Where does the year go, my friends? 2025. We are less than a week to Christmas, but for us, it's the end of the week, the end of the day, nearly the end of the month. It's our favorite time where we wrap on the news with an emphasis on intelligence news on our intelligence community roundtable with my two longtime friends and collaborators, Ray McGovern and Larry Johnson. Guys, welcome here. Thank you, as always. Thank you for the double duty. This is probably the last Intel roundtable for 2025, but not the least significant. We have so much to talk about. However, before we get to the EU trying to steal Russian money, and the Prime Minister of Belgium and the Prime Minister of Hungary preventing that from happening, and the significance of all this. Larry, you had a very interesting piece out this week, and it has fascinated me. So I got to ask this question. It may sound naive or it may be profound. I want you both to answer it, but Larry, to you first. Do CIA analysts and officers lie to each other, Larry?
Yes. Very simple. Yes.
About analysis and substantial things that one would need to know before making decisions?
Oftentimes it's not so much the analysts, it's been the folks on the operations side of the house. And I recounted my one of my experiences. It was probably the most significant that took place on March 12th, 1988. I, along with the Nicaraguan military analyst or the military analyst for the Nicaragua branch, along with the Nicaragua branch chief and the military chief for the Central American Task Force, Directorate of Operations, went down to Capitol Hill to brief a group of congressmen about the situation between Nicaragua and Honduras. In the middle of this meeting, the branch chief gets called out and he comes back in going, "Oh my God, we just got word that the Sandinistas have attacked the Contra camps, which were in southern Honduras. They have overrun them." It was presented like it was the Mexicans at the Alamo killing Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie. And so we got up, concluded the brief, walked out, got in a vehicle to go back. And this guy from the Central American Task Force, last name of Armstrong, not Fulton, he goes, "This is your fault, you analysts. You haven't been supportive enough of the program. You've undermined it." Okay, so we get back out to headquarters, and I said, "Well, let's see what this intelligence was." Well, it was basically a report that there had been a Contra patrol, about 10 guys that were 15 kilometers south of the main Contra camp, and they had stumbled across a Sandinista patrol and had exchanged gunshots. Quite a different story from being told that the camp had been overrun and all the Contras were being slaughtered and it was a Sandinista violation. In fact, Ronald Reagan took that incident and he deployed the 82nd Airborne to Honduras on the pretense to fend off a Sandinista invasion.
Oh, boy.
So, and I wrote all this in the context that at least back then, as Ray remembers, the Directorate of Intelligence was on the north end of the CIA building, and the Directorate of Operations was on the south end of the building. And in fact, back, I think when Ray first joined the CIA, they literally had doors in the middle of the building on all 7 floors that separated intelligence from analysis. The operations from analysis. And then under John Brennan in 2015, he put together these mission centers where analysts were put together side by side with operations personnel. Now, what happens in that setting is like what almost happened to myself and that military analyst for the Nicaragua branch. You come under pressure from the operations folks to be a team player. And in fact, if you're not presenting the right information, you can be cut off from information. If you're not doing the right analysis, you get cut off from information, you get sidelined, you get fired, you don't get promoted. And so what you create is a tendency to lie about what's going on. And that's exactly what we have happening right now. The CIA analysts are lying to Donald Trump, to his administration, about what's really going on the ground in Ukraine.
Ray, your experience with CIA analysts and officers lying to each other.
Well, first, a personal thing about Larry. I don't mind your shirt, Larry, but that swastika right behind you, you're not going to get promoted anytime soon. Is that some
Well,
sort of book? Oh, yeah.
William Schreier, The Rise and Fall of the Third
To
Reich.
the left. Well, Larry is talking about the way it is now, and he's quite apt in describing it. You know, a fish rots from its head. It's the management that can ruin a whole institution. And that happened during my watch. In other words, I was 2/3 through my career when Bobby Gates, whom I had supervised in the 70s, turned out to be the analyst for Bill Casey, the super analyst, head of analysis. And so he set the stage. And then people who were, say, his disciples, like George Tenet, he came in. Now, here's a little vignette. And I have this directly from one of the fellows involved. I won't tell you his name, but his initials are Larry Wilkerson.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, he's up in CIA headquarters, and he and Colin Powell are trying to wade through this crap that they got from the White House and from other people to make sure that they know the weapons of mass destruction there before Powell's speech now, and that there are ties between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. Now, before the attack on Iraq, about 68% of the American people believed that there were ties between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. And of course, that would mean Saddam Hussein was in some measure responsible for what? For 9/11. Okay, so it got so bad that Powell says, Larry, come in. We'd go to this little room it was across the corridor, but it was, they should have known it was still bugged. All right. So they talk about this, and Larry says, this smells to high heaven. And Cole says, okay, we'll get all that stuff out about the ties between Al-Qaeda, and I'll get that all out. So they go across the corridor again, and they go and sit down next to Tenet and McLaughlin and the rest of them, and all of a sudden somebody comes in, just like Larry's story. Oh, we got a confession from one of these Al-Qaeda types. Yeah, they're right. Well, you know what happened? Colin Powell decided, well, he'd go with these guys. He'd believe Tenet, even though there was no reason in the world he should. And so he ended up saying on the 5th of February, 2003, there is a sinister nexus, his words, between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. So it stinks from the top. And I've seen it happen. And it's really sad to see. There's only one exception. And that was after the debacle on Iraq, they decided to get an honest guy in to do an estimate on Iran. His name was Tom Finger. He came from the State Department. They promised him they would leave him alone and let him do a good estimate on nuclear Iran. He came up with an estimate. Principal conclusion was Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work. That was a gutsy decision because everybody wanted to say something different. Right. And that's held till today, as far as I know.
All right. To events of the past week, actually events of the past 24 hours. The Belgian prime minister held his ground with the assistance of the prime minister of Hungary and others to prevent the EU thieves from stealing 300 billion from Belgian banks. Chancellor Merz became apparently apoplectic over this, but he lost the vote. The agreement was to secure a loan for $100 billion to Ukraine. Larry, where is the EU going to get $100 billion from without stealing it?
Hey, I guess they say there's a sucker born every minute. So there's got to be somebody out there in the world that's going to be convinced that, Russia's hanging by a thread. The economy's imploding. The military's in disarray. because they just read it in the Seymour Hersh Substack, and it's got to be true. And I've Cy's mad at me right now, but I've had to point out to him that he was being fed a complete line of what Ray politely calls male bovine excrement, and it wasn't just one lie; it was repeated. And the problem is, this is coming from the intelligence community, principally the CIA. I learned yesterday from another good friend who's still involved, active, that the overwhelming majority of the intelligence that the United States gets concerning the situation on the ground in Ukraine, what's going on with Russia, what Russia's internal situation is like, is coming entirely from Ukrainian intelligence. The U.S. does not have independent sources. It is all derivative of what the Ukrainians are telling us. Gee, could it be possible that the Ukrainians could be lying or shading things to make it look like what they're experiencing is actually what the Russians are experiencing? So, but the consequence of this is that these people involved with the negotiations, including Witkoff and Kushner, are led to believe that Russia is suffering massive losses, that Russia is economically on the brink. I mean, Cy Hersh actually wrote that you can't get a loan in Russia.
I saw that. It's ridiculous. You and I know that.
Well, yeah, and I called up Stas Krapivnik, I've got another friend who's a West Point grad from 1972. He moved back to Russia. The loans are available. That's what banks do. They got credit cards. Such a ridiculous mistake. And yet that information is spread around. And so that's why the U.S. continues to believe, okay, we got a chance. The Russians, we got to find that leverage. No, the U.S. does not have any leverage over Russia whatsoever. None. Zero.
Ray, the Colonel McGregor reports that yesterday, 80 tons of United States military gear left over Delaware for Poland on cargo ships destined for Ukraine. 80 tons. Add that, the number's not that big, to 400 million authorized, this is cash, 400 million authorized in the National Defense Authorization Act for Ukraine that President Trump signed into law earlier this week. How do you think the Russians feel about this?
Well, I think they're amused rather than shocked. Obviously, and they have said this explicitly, Trump has problems at home. He has people that he has to demonstrate that he's not going to settle on Ukraine without Ukraine being included in the talks. He's got all kinds of things. Now, the 400 million is a drop in a bucket, as you mentioned. Can the Poles use that stuff? Sure, they can. Will that ever get into Ukraine? I don't know. They can easily prevent it. The Russians can. So, just a matter of time before the Poles and everyone else wakes up to the fact that, look, the deal is done here. You couldn't steal the money. You can't keep them going for another year unless everybody really finds the money. Where are they going to find the money? Oh, they're going to take it as social projects in these countries. Give me a break. They've already put big holes in the social safety net in those countries. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. It's just a matter of time before, tomorrow, Dmitriev arrives in Miami again. Well, where's he go to Miami? Gamble or sun? No,
he's going to meet Witkoff and Kushner, right? Not Rubio, but Witkoff and Kushner.
Yeah. So this would be funny if it hadn't happened 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
exactly the same thing.
Larry, I hope Cy is watching, because we're going to run a clip of President Putin taunting Zelensky, and if Putin was in the shape that Cy Hersh says he's in, I don't think Putin would be this happy and jocular about Zelensky. Watch this. This is from just 3 or 4 hours ago. Chris, cut number 4.
A writer, an artist, a talented person. I'm saying this without any irony. We know this from his films back in the old days. So there's nothing unusual about it here. Well, they say the Steely looks completely different now. But that's not the point. The stele is located about a kilometer away from the city itself.
So why stand on the threshold? Come on in.
That's right. Well, if Kupiansk is already under their control.
I guess he was sort of taunting Zelensky there. He did speak, of course, with far more seriousness when he was responding to Mark Ruda. We'll play that one as well. Chris, cut number 6.
Why are you talking about a war with Russia? We need to prepare for a war with Russia. They want to prepare for a war with Russia. Well, can you read? Read the new U.S. national security strategy. What does it say? The U.S., I want to point out, is the key player in NATO. The U.S. created NATO, is its main sponsor, and all the main resources come from the U.S. Both money and technology, military equipment, weapons and ammunition, all of it comes from there. This is the foundation in the new NATO's comprehensive national security strategy. However, Russia is currently not explicitly listed as a direct enemy, and this stance is subject to ongoing review. As a target, but the NATO Secretary General is preparing for war with us. What is that supposed to mean? But can you read? How can you say that NATO is preparing for war with Russia if the main NATO member doesn't consider us an adversary or enemy? It's just, I don't know, even the level of professional competence in this position is insufficient.
Larry, that's the most significant part of the national security strategy. Russia is not the enemy. Russia is somebody we want to do business with. I don't know what's going to happen in Mar-a-Lago or Miami, wherever they're meeting in South Florida. These two clowns sat on their hands while Chancellor Merz told everybody NATO would still be in Ukraine, and Ukraine would have an 800,000-man army, and Russia would have its military equipment, demilitarized zone in a portion of Russia. They just didn't object to it.
Well, wait a second. Let me intervene here. They sat on their hands. Look, the game is for them to keep their mouths shut, not offend the Europeans, and be able to come back and say, look, we listened to them really carefully, but when Dmitriev arrives tomorrow, they're going to forget all about that because those are Europeans and they don't matter anymore, and neither does Zelensky. So,
and the Europeans won't be there tomorrow.
Of course not. So they've been marginalized. So what Witkoff, and they sat there and listened only because they had to come back to the U.S. and tell Congress and tell Senator Graham and all those people, look, we listened really carefully to the Ukrainians. And it wouldn't be so funny if it hadn't happened exactly 3 weeks ago, the same sort of route. Dmitriev arrives, and then the Ukrainians will come to be briefed, and then the deal will be made. The deal will continue to be even.
Larry, is your view as sanguine as Ray's?
Well, yes and no. Look, unless Russia convinces Donald Trump to sign a treaty, and a treaty that is going to be submitted to the U.S. Senate and ratified by the U.S. Senate, any agreement that Donald Trump reaches with the Russians is meaningless because Trump does not have the full political support. And I guess I continue to be shocked by how penetrated the U.S. public opinion is and has been twisted against Russia and believe this mountain of lies that has been told persistently that Russia is a communist state, it's an authoritarian state, it's an imperialist state. Putin is the greatest evil the world's ever known since Adolf Hitler. In fact, he's worse than Hitler and Stalin combined. That the military's inept, incompetent, they're going to lose any minute. Now, that's not a view just held by people like Lindsey Graham and Dick Blumenthal of Connecticut. It is actually held by many in the Senate in particular and in the House of Representatives. Now, part of the sentiment of these people has been bought by the Ukrainians. They've funneled millions of dollars into at least 29 members of the House and Senate.
Is Lindsey Graham corrupt? Has he been corrupted by the Ukrainians?
I believe he has. I'm told that he has been. I can't prove that, but look, the corruption goes on and the misinformation that reference to that Putin was making to Zelensky and the Stella. Zelensky, the Russians had captured Kupiansk. The Ukrainians insisted, no, they haven't. We've got it. We've got it under control. See, here's a picture of Zelensky standing next to the sign that's out on the outskirts of Kupiansk. The problem was then some curious local Ukrainians went out and filmed that location, and the sign was basically been blown up. It was damaged. So what they proved was that this was just another green screen effect where they put Zelensky in front of something, made it it's propaganda, and that's what the West continues to do best: create all this propaganda, trying to convince the public, especially in the United States, that Ukraine still has a chance. I mean, Russia, all it's going to take is another little push, just a little more pressure, and Russia's going to collapse. And that's whatever goodwill exists between the Russians and Trump. And I think it is genuine. And that's where, I agree with Ray on that. And Dmitriev has got the confidence of Witkoff and Kushner, and it's probably vice versa. But the bulk of the U.S. political establishment does not support that.
Right.
They support the European position. And I don't see how the Russians can put any faith or confidence in any agreement signed just with Donald Trump's broker.
Without 2/3 of the Senate ratifying.
Yeah,
I think that's a great analysis. Ray, I want your thoughts on something else President Putin said. We'll run the clip for you right now, suggesting this is terrific. Russia and Europe should trade with each other rather than fighting with each other. So, number 5, Chris.
And if we were to join our efforts with European countries, Russia and European countries, our joint GDP would be higher than the United States. Of course, this is all theoretical, but it is quite obvious. The fact is quite obvious that unifying and complementing our abilities, we would thrive instead of fighting each other like you are doing.
How do people like Ray, Starmer, Macron, and Merz and their buddies react when the president of Russia says unifying and complementing our abilities and we will thrive instead of fighting each other?
Well, Macron yesterday said, well, maybe we ought to talk to Russia. Oh, that's something that we're going to in years. Maybe we ought to, look, the game is up. They can't have the money. They can't have the armaments. They can't have a really good deal on Ukraine. And what is possible out of all this? Well, if you look a couple of years or even a couple of months in advance, nothing is impossible. Now, I would cite John F. Kennedy at a time when communists, the atheist communism was just as bad as they came out of Russiagate, okay? And what did he do? He gave a speech and he said, look, as a token of my willingness to meet Russians halfway, I'm going to do a limited test ban treaty, okay? And everybody said, yeah, right, treaty. You're making a treaty through the Senate? No way can you do that. Khrushchev published that speech completely in Pravda, and in 2 months, Avril Hamerman and the others had concluded the treaty, and the treaty was ratified by the Senate. Now, it takes a little adroitness and diplomacy. Maybe Trump doesn't have that, but don't rule anything out that might come months in advance. As the national security strategy says, now it is a core principle, Russian language, of the United States to have a good, substantive, strategic relationship with Russia. And the way to do that is to get the Ukrainian thing behind us. That's right in the thing. So when Putin is saying that's uncharacteristic for him to be so sharp. Yeah, the game is over. And why don't the Europeans realize that, are they going to go at the people that break their pipelines like Nord Stream, or are they going to go at people that made their electric and their gas bills like 1/6 of what they are now? there's lots of room for maneuver here that has not been there before. And as I say, if the primary Russian objective, which they keep saying, is to have a decent relationship with the United States, Ukraine is secondary. You can bomb the hell out of Iran, even that's secondary. The stakes are high. Why? Because Putin can't trust a material person like Trump with his fingers on the nuclear codes to act sensibly. He's got to cajole him. He's got to babysit him. He's got to bring him along gradually. And I think he's succeeded in that to a large extent with this new national security strategy.
I agree with what Ray has said, Larry, and I thought your analysis right before Ray was right on the mark. In a sense, Trump has more difficulty with the Tom Cottons and Lindsey Grahams of the world than he does with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Look, the national security strategy with respect to Europe was previewed back in February at the Munich Security Conference, when J.D. Vance stood up and basically told the Europeans, hey, you suck, and you need to create, fix yourselves. I wouldn't have been surprised if Trump had sent one of those cards that play music and the Europeans open it up and it's Fleetwood Mac singing Go Your Own Way. The Trump administration is sending signals to the Europeans. And I can understand it from Trump's standpoint, just in terms of what the Europeans did to Trump during Russiagate. They were the UK was the lead, but there were others throughout Europe that collaborated in providing intelligence to try to paint Trump as an agent of Russia. So on just that point alone, Trump's not inclined to have warm, friendly, cuddly relationships with any of the NATO EU crowd. Now, he's not going to go out and necessarily publicly pick a fight with them, but he does understand this. Europe brings nothing to the table. I mean, up to this point, Trump's had to threaten and cajole them just to get them to offer a verbal commitment to kick in 5% for NATO of their GDP. Still hasn't happened. And all of the time when Europe is economically in real trouble. So, I think Trump correctly at least sees a possible economic future with Russia. But the problem Trump has is the intelligence community is undermining him, putting out an alternative message.
Right. Gentlemen, we have to go. I have to tell you that at the outset of this show, 35 minutes or so ago, Judging Freedom had 99,887,000 views. Wow. That means that we will probably break 100 million views in 2025 sometime over the weekend. Wow. No two people have contributed more to this than the two of you, who have done double duty regularly, consistently, systematically every week, and once in a while triple duty, depending upon the news cycle. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think by the time I see each of you individually, because this is probably our last roundtable for 2025, by the time I see each of you individually on Monday morning, we will have broken 100 million. That's for the second year in a row. It puts us in a very exclusive category. It means more people are watching this than watch a certain, I won't mention the name, news network. Gentlemen, thank you. I love you both. Thank you for everything. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. And coming up on Monday, now it's a strange week for us because we're dark live from lunchtime Wednesday, Christmas Eve on, but we're going to pack in as many of our regular guests all day Monday, all day Tuesday, and Wednesday morning as we can. For sure, on Monday morning, your usual favorites, Alistair Crook, Ray McGovern, Larry Johnson, and you'll be surprised with who we'll have Monday afternoon. Thank you for watching. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.